The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the prairie as Nora Miller huddled in the corner of the barn, her body trembling with each sob that escaped her lips. She'd been traveling west with her husband when he was killed by bandits 2 days prior, leaving her alone, terrified, and 6 months pregnant with twins. Now, as the howling wind rattled the wooden slats of a stranger's barn where she'd sought refuge, she clutched her swollen belly and wondered how she'd ever survive this cruel frontier. Dallas Reed froze in the doorway of his own barn, lantern held high, the weathered lines of his face illuminated by its golden glow. He'd come to check on his horses before turning in for the night, not expecting to find a woman clearly with child weeping on the hay-strewn floor. "Madam." He called softly, setting the lantern down and approaching slowly, the way he might a spooked mare. "Are you hurt?" Nora gasped, scrambling backward until her spine pressed against the rough wooden wall. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I didn't mean to trespass." "I just needed shelter for the night." Dallas crouched down, keeping a respectful distance. The woman's face was streaked with dirt and tears, her dark blonde hair falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. Her dress was torn and travel-worn, but he could tell it had once been fine. Most telling was the gold band on her finger that caught the lantern light. "Where's your husband, madam?" he asked gently. Fresh tears welled in Nora's eyes. "Dead," she choked out, "ambushed on the trail to Santa Fe 2 days ago." Her hands instinctively cradled her rounded belly. "They took everything, our wagon, our supplies. I walked until I couldn't anymore." Dallas removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that." His eyes lingered on her belly. "And the little ones?" "Twins," she whispered. "The doctor in Missouri told me before we left. I have nothing for them now. No home, no family." Her body shook with a fresh wave of sobs. Something stirred in Dallas's chest, a feeling he'd long thought buried alongside his own wife and stillborn son 7 years ago. Without thinking, he reached out a calloused hand and placed it gently on the woman's shoulder. "I'll raise them as my own sons," the cowboy told the pregnant widow crying in his barn. "If you'll let me help you, that is." Nora's green eyes widened in disbelief. "You don't even know me." "I know you need help, and I've got a home with room to spare." Dallas stood, offering his hand. "My name is Dallas Reed. This is my ranch, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need." "Nora," she replied, hesitantly taking his hand. "Nora Miller." Dallas helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed slightly. "Well, Mrs. Miller, let's get you up to the house. You need a proper meal and a real bed. We can figure out the rest tomorrow." As they walked slowly toward the sturdy log cabin silhouetted against the darkening sky, Nora couldn't help but wonder if this stranger's kindness was a blessing, or if she'd just made another terrible mistake. But with nowhere else to turn and 2 lives depending on her, she followed the tall cowboy into his home. The main room of Dallas's cabin was simple but well kept. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, currently hosting a small but warm fire. A wooden table with 4 chairs sat nearby, and a rocking chair was positioned by the hearth. Through an open doorway, Nora could see a bedroom. "Please sit," Dallas said, gesturing to the table. "I'll fix you something to eat." Nora sank gratefully into a chair, watching as her unexpected host moved efficiently around the small kitchen area. "You live here alone?" she asked. Dallas nodded as he stirred a pot of stew hanging over the fire. "Have done for 7 years now. My wife, Sarah, passed in childbirth. The baby, too." His voice was steady, but Nora didn't miss the flash of pain that crossed his face. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He shrugged, ladling stew into a bowl. "Life out here can be hard, but it goes on." He placed the bowl before her, along with a chunk of bread. "Eat. You've got more than yourself to think about now." The stew was hearty and delicious, and Nora realized how hungry she was. She ate in silence while Dallas busied himself preparing the bedroom. "You'll take my room," he said when he returned. "I'll sleep out here by the fire." "I couldn't possibly. You can and you will," he said firmly, though not unkindly. "You need proper rest." After she'd eaten, Dallas showed her to the bedroom. It was simply furnished with a bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a basin and pitcher of water. "There's a nightgown of Sarah's in the chest," he said, turning to leave. It might fit well enough considering. He nodded toward her belly. "Mr. Reed," Nora called as he reached the door. "Thank you for everything." Dallas nodded once. "Get some rest, Mrs. Miller." Alone in the room, Nora changed into the offered nightgown. It was soft with age and smelled faintly of lavender. As she lay in the unfamiliar bed, one hand resting protectively over her unborn children, she whispered a prayer of thanks for the strange cowboy's kindness while begging forgiveness for the relief she felt at her husband's passing. Jack Miller had not been a kind man. Their marriage had been arranged by her father to settle a debt, and though Jack had never struck her, his words had cut deeper than any physical blow could have. When he'd announced they were heading west to start anew, Nora had hoped for a fresh beginning. Now she wondered if his death was her chance at the life she'd never dared to dream of. With these conflicted thoughts swirling in her mind, exhaustion finally claimed her, and she fell into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in years. Dallas sat by the dying embers of the fire, turning his wedding band around his finger, a habit he'd never broken despite the years since Sarah's death. He'd spoken true when he told Nora he'd help raise her children, but he hadn't expected the words to come out so quickly or with such certainty. Something about the vulnerable yet determined look in those green eyes had awakened a protectiveness he thought had died with his family. He knew the dangers a woman alone faced in this untamed land, especially one in her condition. He couldn't in good conscience turn her away. But there was more to it, a selfish part of him that had been lonely for too long. The ranch was profitable enough, his cattle herd growing each year, but the empty house echoed with silence each night. Perhaps this strange turn of events was God's way of giving him a second chance at the family he'd lost. Dawn broke clear and cold over the prairie. Dallas had been up for hours, tending to the horses and cattle before returning to prepare breakfast. He was frying bacon when Nora emerged from the bedroom, her hair neatly braided and wearing her own dress again, though she'd clearly attempted to clean it as best she could. "Good morning," she said hesitantly, hovering in the doorway. Dallas nodded. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in months," she admitted, moving to the table. "May I help with anything? Just sit. Breakfast is nearly ready." They ate in companionable silence, the awkwardness of strangers gradually easing. When they'd finished, Nora insisted on washing the dishes despite Dallas's protests. "We should talk about what happens next," Dallas said as she dried the last plate. Nora set the plate down carefully, steeling herself. "Yes, I suppose we should. I meant what I said last night." "You're welcome to stay and I'll help with the children." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I understand if you'd rather move on once you're stronger. Maybe you have family somewhere?" Nora shook her head. "My parents died 2 years ago. There's no one else." Dallas nodded, processing this information. "Then my offer stands, but there are things to consider. Such as, this is a small community, people talk." He cleared his throat. "It might be best if we presented a specific arrangement to the neighbors." Nora's cheeks flushed. "What kind of arrangement?" "Nothing improper," Dallas assured her quickly. "But a widow staying alone with an unmarried man would raise eyebrows. I thought perhaps we could say you're my widowed sister-in-law, come to live with me after your husband's passing." Relief flooded Nora's features. "That seems reasonable. There's a small town about 10 miles east, Cottonwood Springs. They have a doctor there. We should get you checked over, make sure everything's progressing as it should with the babies." Nora nodded, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." "Dallas," he corrected. "If we're to be family, even just for appearances, you should call me Dallas." "Dallas," she repeated, testing the name. "And I'm Nora." Later that morning, Dallas hitched his wagon and helped Nora up onto the seat. The journey to Cottonwood Springs was pleasant, the spring air fresh and the wildflowers beginning to dot the landscape. Dallas pointed out landmarks as they traveled, telling Nora about the area and the people who lived there. "The town's not much," he explained as they crested a hill and the settlement came into view. "But Dr. Nathan is good at his work, and Mrs. Peterson at the general store is fair with her prices." Nora nodded, taking in the single dusty street lined with wooden buildings. It wasn't much compared to St. Louis where she'd grown up, but there was something appealing about its simplicity. The doctor confirmed that both babies appeared to be developing normally, though he cautioned Nora to rest as much as possible in the coming months. Twin births can come early, he warned, and they're often more complicated. Afterward, Dallas took her to the general store where he introduced her as my late brother's wife, come to stay with me after his passing. Mrs. Peterson, a plump woman with kind eyes, immediately took Nora under her wing, helping her select fabric for new dresses to accommodate her growing belly and insisting Dallas purchase proper tea for the poor dear's nerves. By the time they headed back to the ranch, Nora felt overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers. "Everyone has been so helpful," she remarked as the wagon bumped along the trail. Dallas's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Folks out here understand that survival depends on helping each other." "Besides," he added, glancing at her, "it's not every day a pretty young woman moves to these parts. The men will be lining up to court you once the babies are born." Nora felt her cheeks warm at his casual compliment. "I'm not interested in remarrying," she said firmly. Dallas raised an eyebrow but didn't comment further. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable routine. Dallas worked the ranch during the day while Nora kept house, insisting it was the least she could do in exchange for his generosity. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Dallas often reading aloud from one of the few books he owned, while Nora sewed baby clothes from the fabric they'd purchased. As Nora's pregnancy progressed, Dallas found himself increasingly protective of his houseguest. He worried when she seemed tired and insisted she rest frequently. He brought wild strawberries home when he found them growing on the range, remembering how Sarah had craved them during her pregnancy. For her part, Nora found herself watching Dallas when he wasn't looking the way his strong hands gently handled newborn calves, how the sun had weathered his face but left his blue eyes bright and clear, the soft smile that sometimes appeared when he thought she wasn't looking. It confused her, these feelings stirring for a man she barely knew, especially so soon after becoming a widow. But Jack had never looked at her the way Dallas did, like she was something precious to be protected, not a burden to be tolerated. Jack had never asked about her day or listened to her opinions or brought her wildflowers just because they matched her eyes. One evening in early June, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Nora felt a strange sensation in her belly. She gasped, placing both hands over the spot. Dallas was immediately alert. "What is it? Are you in pain?" Nora shook her head, a wondering smile spreading across her face. "No, they're moving. I felt flutters before, but this was different, stronger." Without thinking, she reached for Dallas's hand. "Here, feel." She placed his palm against the side of her belly and waited. After a moment, there was a distinct kick against his hand. Dallas's eyes widened in amazement. "That's something, isn't it?" he whispered, his hand lingering on her belly. Nora nodded, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of his hand still resting on her, of the intimate moment they were sharing. "They know your voice," she said softly. "They get active when you're talking." Dallas slowly withdrew his hand, but his eyes remained on hers. Nora, whatever he was about to say was interrupted by the distant sound of an approaching rider. Dallas stood, his expression shifting to wariness as he scanned the horizon. "Stay here," he instructed, moving toward the steps. A lone horseman appeared, riding hard toward the ranch. As he drew closer, Dallas relaxed slightly, recognizing Nathan Davis, one of his neighbors. "Dallas," Nathan called, reining in his horse. "Thank God you're home. There's trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Dallas asked, walking to meet him. "Rustlers hit the Hamilton place last night. Took near half their herd and shot Ben when he tried to stop them." Nathan's face was grim. "He'll live, but we're gathering men to go after the thieves before they get too far. Word is they're headed toward the border." Dallas's jaw tightened. Cattle rustling was a hanging offense in these parts, and with good reason. A rancher's livelihood depended on his herd, and losing a significant portion could mean financial ruin. "When are you riding out?" he asked. "First light tomorrow, meeting at Hamilton's place." Dallas nodded. "I'll be there." After Nathan rode off, Dallas returned to the porch where Nora waited, her face pale with concern. "You're going after them?" she asked. "I have to. Ben Hamilton has a wife and 3 young children. Those cattle are all that stands between them and starvation come winter." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll be gone a few days at most. Will you be all right here alone?" Nora nodded, though her eyes betrayed her worry. "Be careful, Dallas." He reached out, briefly squeezing her hand. "I will. There's a loaded rifle in the bedroom should you need it, though I doubt you will. Keep the doors locked at night." That night, as they prepared for bed, an unusual tension hung in the air. Dallas would be leaving before dawn, riding into potential danger, and Nora found herself afraid in a way she hadn't expected. In the short time she'd known him, Dallas had become her protector, her friend, and perhaps something more she wasn't ready to name. "Dallas," she said as he was about to retire to his makeshift bed by the fire. "Please come back safely. The babies and I, we need you." Something flashed in his eyes, surprise, followed by a warmth that made her heart beat faster. "I'll come back, Nora, I promise." The next 3 days were the longest of Nora's life. She busied herself with household tasks, tried to focus on her sewing, but found herself constantly listening for hoofbeats that might signal Dallas's return. When a summer storm rolled in on the second night, bringing with it howling wind and lashing rain, she lay awake worrying about him out in the elements, possibly wounded or worse. On the afternoon of the 4th day, just as Nora was beginning to fear the worst, she heard a horse approaching. She rushed to the window, her heart leaping at the sight of Dallas riding slowly toward the cabin. Even from a distance, she could tell he was exhausted, slumped slightly in the saddle. She hurried outside as he dismounted stiffly. His face was grimy with trail dust, a dark bruise bloomed on his left cheekbone, and his clothes were splattered with what looked suspiciously like blood. "Dallas, are you hurt?" she asked, reaching for him instinctively. He shook his head. "Not badly, just tired and sore." His voice was rough with fatigue. "We caught up to them near the border. There was a fight. We got most of the cattle back, and the rustlers," a shadow crossed his face. "2 dead, 1 wounded and taken to jail in Cottonwood Springs. The rest escaped across the border." Nora slipped her arm around his waist, supporting him as they walked toward the house. "You need rest and food, and I'll heat water for a bath." Dallas looked down at her, a tired smile tugging at his lips. "You don't have to fuss over me." "Yes, I do," she said firmly. "Now sit before you fall down." To her surprise, he obeyed without argument, sinking into a chair at the table while she busied herself preparing a meal from the stew she'd kept simmering in anticipation of his return. As she worked, she kept glancing over at him, reassuring herself that he was really there, safe and mostly whole. After he'd eaten and bathed, Dallas seemed more like himself, though the shadows beneath his eyes spoke of the ordeal he'd been through. They sat on the porch as evening fell, the air still warm but pleasant after the recent rain. "I was worried about you," Nora admitted, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Dallas turned to look at her, his expression softening. "Were you now?" Nora nodded, finding it difficult to meet his gaze. "I've grown, accustomed to having you around," Dallas chuckled softly. "High praise indeed." "You know what I mean," she chided gently. "You've been kind to me when you had no reason to be. You've given me a home, security for my children." "Our children," he corrected quietly. Nora's breath caught at the possessive pronoun. "Yes," she whispered. "Our children." Dallas reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "Nora, I've been thinking while I was away. Life's too short and too precious to waste. I know we've only known each other a short while, but I care for you, more than I thought possible after Sarah." Nora felt tears prick her eyes. "Dallas, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. But I want you to know that my offer to help raise the twins wasn't just charity. I want to be a father to them in every way that matters, and someday, if you'll have me, I'd like to be more than just a friend to you." A tear slipped down Nora's cheek. "I care for you too," she admitted. "But I'm afraid my marriage to Jack wasn't good, and I'm carrying his children." Dallas squeezed her hand. "These babies are innocent of their father's failings, and you deserve happiness, Nora, we both do." They sat in silence for a while, hands entwined, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Nothing was resolved, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first night in the barn. As summer gave way to fall, Nora's pregnancy advanced to its final stages. Her belly grew enormously, making even simple tasks difficult. Dallas hired a local girl, Mary, to come help with the housework 3 times a week, ignoring Nora's protests that she could manage. "You're carrying 2 babies," he pointed out reasonably. "Dr. Nathan said you need to rest more." The doctor had indeed become concerned at Nora's last visit, warning that the twins might come early and recommending bed rest as much as possible. Dallas had taken this advice to heart, practically ordering Nora to stay off her feet whenever possible. His protectiveness might have been annoying if it hadn't been so endearing. He read to her for hours, brought her special treats from town, and even learned to brew the medicinal tea the doctor had prescribed for her swollen ankles. One cool October evening, as they sat by the fire with Dallas reading aloud from David Copperfield, Nora felt a sharp pain lance through her abdomen. She gasped, clutching her belly. Dallas was immediately at her side. "What is it, I think?" "I think it might be time," Nora said, her voice shaking slightly. Dallas's face paled, but he nodded resolutely. "All right, what do you need me to do?" Another contraction gripped her, stronger this time. "The doctor," she managed through gritted teeth, "and Mrs. Peterson. She's helped with deliveries before." Dallas squeezed her hand. "I'll go for them right now. Will you be all right alone for a bit?" Nora nodded, trying to look braver than she felt. "The babies aren't coming this minute, just hurry." After Dallas left, riding hard for town, Nora paced the small cabin as best she could, pausing to breathe through each contraction. She tried not to think about the dangers of childbirth, especially with twins, or about the fact that her own mother had died bringing her into the world. Instead, she focused on the future, on Dallas's promise to raise these children as his own, on the tentative happiness they'd found together, on the possibility of a real family. She would not leave these babies motherless. She would not leave Dallas alone again. It seemed like hours before she heard horses approaching, though it couldn't have been more than 45 minutes. Dallas burst through the door, followed by Mrs. Peterson carrying a large basket and Dr. Nathan with his medical bag. "How are you doing, my dear, Mrs. Peterson asked, immediately taking charge. "Let's get you comfortable." The next several hours passed in a blur of pain for Nora. The contractions came faster and stronger, and there were moments when she thought she couldn't possibly endure more. Through it all, Dallas refused to leave her side, holding her hand and wiping her brow with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement even when the doctor suggested he might want to wait outside as was customary. "I'm staying," Dallas said firmly. "She needs me," and she did. His steady presence gave her strength when her own began to fail. When Dr. Nathan announced that the first baby was finally coming, Dallas supported Nora's shoulders as she pushed, his deep voice in her ear telling her she could do this, that she was the strongest woman he'd ever known. The first cry of her son pierced the room just after midnight. Mrs. Peterson quickly cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing him briefly in Nora's arms. "He's perfect," Nora whispered, tears streaming down her face as she gazed at the tiny red face. "Just like his mama," Dallas said, his voice thick with emotion. There was little time to celebrate as the second baby was already demanding to make his entrance. The doctor warned that the second delivery could be more complicated, and indeed, Nora found herself growing weaker with each push. "I can't," she sobbed after a particularly painful contraction. "Dallas, I can't do it." Dallas cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "Yes, you can. You're almost there. Our boys need their mother, Nora. I need you." Drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, Nora gave one final push. The second baby boy entered the world with a lusty wail that belied his small size. "They're both healthy," Dr. Nathan announced after examining the twins. "Small as expected with twins, but strong, Mrs. Peterson helped clean Nora and change the bedding while Dallas held both swaddled infants, his large hands looking almost comically oversized against their tiny bodies. The wonder on his face as he gazed down at them made Nora's heart swell with love. When everything was settled, the doctor and Mrs. Peterson departed with promises to return the next day. Dallas carefully placed the sleeping twins in the cradle he'd built and positioned it next to the bed where Nora lay exhausted but exhilarated. "They need names," Dallas said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking her hand. Nora nodded. "I was thinking Daniel for the first one after you." Dallas looked startled. "After me, Dallas, Daniel close enough," she said with a tired smile. "He should be named for the man who will raise him." Dallas swallowed hard. "I'd be honored, and the second one." Nora looked at the smaller twin, his wisps of dark hair so different from his brother's lighter coloring. "David," she decided. "It means beloved." "Daniel and David," Dallas repeated, testing the names. "Strong names for strong boys." "Dallas," Nora said, squeezing his hand. "Did you mean what you said before, that you need me?" His blue eyes met hers, all his feelings laid bare. "More than I've ever needed anyone." "Then I think," she said carefully, "that these boys should have your name as well as your love, if you still want that." For a moment, Dallas seemed unable to speak. Then, very gently, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "I want that more than anything," he whispered against her lips. "When you're stronger, if you're still sure, I'll ride to town for the preacher." Nora smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "I've never been more sure of anything." 2 weeks later, on a crisp November morning, Preacher Williams from Cottonwood Springs stood in Dallas's living room to perform a simple wedding ceremony. Mrs. Peterson held Daniel while Mary held David, both babies sleeping peacefully through the proceedings. Nathan Davis served as witness, grinning broadly at his friend's happiness. Nora wore a new dress of soft blue wool that Mrs. Peterson had helped her make, and Dallas had polished his boots and trimmed his beard for the occasion. When they spoke their vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Reed." Dallas gathered Nora gently in his arms, mindful of her still recovering body, and kissed her with a reverence that made her heart sing. "Mrs. Reed," he murmured against her ear, "I like the sound of that." Later, after their guests had departed and the twins had been fed and settled, Dallas and Nora stood on the porch of their home, his arm around her waist as they watched the sunset. "Are you happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Nora leaned into his embrace, thinking of how much had changed in the 6 months since she'd stumbled into his barn, desperate and alone. Now she had a husband who looked at her with love in his eyes, 2 beautiful sons, and a home filled with warmth and laughter. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. The first year of marriage brought challenges as they adjusted to life with twins, but it also cemented the bond between Dallas and Nora. The babies thrived under their care, growing from fragile newborns into sturdy, curious infants. Daniel, the firstborn, was quieter and more observant, while David was louder and more demanding of attention. Dallas adored both boys equally, spending hours playing with them after his work was done. Nora watched her husband with their sons and fell more deeply in love with him each day. He never once treated the twins as anything but his own children, correcting anyone who mentioned their parentage with a firm, "They're my boys." By the time the twins celebrated their first birthday, Nora had news of her own to share. As they sat on the porch after putting the boys to bed, she took Dallas's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to need a bigger house," she said with a smile. Dallas's eyes widened. "Are you certain?" Nora nodded. "Dr. Nathan confirmed it yesterday." "Just one this time, he thinks." The joy that spread across Dallas's face was something Nora would remember for the rest of her life. He lifted her from her chair and spun her around, laughing. "A baby," he whispered, setting her down gently. "Our baby." "Our family is growing," Nora said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Just like our love." Dallas kissed her deeply. "I never thought I'd have this again, a family, a purpose, a woman to love who loves me back. When I found myself in your barn that night, I thought my life was over," Nora confessed. "Instead, it was just beginning." 7 months later, their daughter Sophia was born, a beautiful girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's delicate features. Dallas was as besotted with his daughter as he was with his sons, and the sight of the big, strong cowboy tenderly cradling his tiny girl became a familiar one around the ranch. As the years passed, the Reed family continued to grow and flourish. The ranch prospered under Dallas's careful management, allowing them to build a larger home to accommodate their expanding family. 2 more children joined them, a boy named Michael and another girl, Sarah, named for Dallas's first wife. Daniel and David grew into fine young men who never questioned their place in the family. When they were 12, Dallas and Nora sat them down and told them the truth about their birth father, feeling they deserved to know their history. "But Pa is our real father," Daniel had declared firmly, looking at Dallas with eyes so like his mother's. "He's the one who raised us and taught us everything important." David had nodded in agreement. "Blood don't make a family, love does." Dallas had to turn away to hide the tears in his eyes, but not before the boys saw and enveloped him in a fierce hug. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Dallas took Nora for a ride to a special spot on their property, a gentle rise overlooking a meadow where wildflowers grew in abundance. They dismounted and spread a blanket on the grass, sharing the picnic lunch Nora had packed. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Nora asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder as they watched the clouds drift across the blue sky. Dallas smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "I told you I'd raise those boys as my own, and you did." Nora turned to face him, taking his weathered hands in hers. "You gave me hope when I had none, Dallas Reed. You gave me a home and a family and a love I never dreamed possible." Dallas brought her hands to his lips, kissing them gently. "You gave me just as much, Nora. You brought life back to my empty house and heart." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. Their children were all at the house, Daniel courting a girl from town, David helping Michael with his reading, Sophia and Sarah preparing dinner under the supervision of Mrs. Peterson, who had become like a grandmother to them all. "We've been blessed," Dallas said softly. Nora nodded, thinking of the frightened, pregnant widow she had been and the confident, beloved woman she had become. "Yes," she agreed, "we certainly have." As they rode back to their home, where lights spilled from the windows and the sounds of their children's laughter floated on the evening air, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Life in the West had not been easy. There had been droughts and blizzards, illness and hardship, but through it all, she and Dallas had faced each challenge together, their love only strengthening with each passing year. What had begun with a desperate plea in a stranger's barn had become a life filled with joy, purpose, and abiding love. And as Dallas helped her down from her horse and pulled her into his arms for a kiss that still made her heart race after all these years, Nora knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Many years later, when Dallas and Nora's grandchildren gathered around them on the wide porch of the ranch house, they often asked to hear the story of how their family began. "Tell us again, Grandpa," little Sarah Jane would plead, her eyes so like her grandmother's wide with wonder. "About the night you found Grandma in the barn." And Dallas, his hair now silver but his blue eyes still bright, would pull Nora closer to his side and begin the tale. "It was a red sunset, just like tonight's," he would say, his deep voice carrying across the porch. "And I went to check on the horses before turning in." Nora would listen, her heart full as she watched the faces of their grandchildren, some with Dallas's strong jaw, others with her green eyes, all of them beloved. And she would remember the words that had changed her life. "I'll raise them as my own sons." Simple words spoken by a good man who had kept his promise and given her so much more than she could have imagined on that desperate night so many years ago. A man who had taught her what true love really meant, not through grand gestures or flowery words, but through unwavering support, gentle kindness, and a lifetime of choosing to love her and their family every single day. As the golden light of another western sunset bathed them all in its warm glow, Nora would catch Dallas's eye over the heads of their grandchildren and smile, silently thanking him once again for the life they had built together. And in his answering smile, she would see the same love and gratitude reflected back the shared joy of two people who had found each other against all odds and created something beautiful and lasting in this wild, untamed land they called home.